cheap is bad. Why bother buying it for less than $20 Harbor Freight? The whole map is bought to use once and then thrown away. If you've ever thought that, you're not wrong. But you're also missing out on a lot of valuable things. In 2026, with material prices rising and labor costs no cheaper, and household chores not disappearing on their own, things will be tough. As a homeowner or carpenter, you have two options: either pay more or do more yourself, but do it smarter. And being smart here doesn't mean buying the most expensive tools. It means buying the right item in the right place at the right price. In this video, I'll share 15 Harbor Freight tools under $20 that aren't toys or impulse buys, but items you'll use over and over again, every weekend, every project. These items will help you save money, save time, and most importantly, reduce unnecessary frustration in your garage. Let's start with the first dish, which is also the most often overlooked. If you've ever worked in a garage long enough, you'll understand a very basic truth. Screws don't just disappear. They simply fall right where you can't see, can't reach, and don't want to bend down again. A snail rolling off a desk might not sound like much. But then you start crawling under the car, squeezing under the cold concrete floor, muttering a few familiar curses of middle-aged Americans, just to find a piece of metal worth a few cents. And in the meantime, you've wasted both time and patience, and you might even lose your motivation to continue. That's why a magnetic parts tray or silicone magnetic bowl under zero has become an item that so many homeowners and woodworkers use almost every week. Even though they previously thought, what's the point of buying this? It doesn't make you better. It doesn't make the project more beautiful, but it keeps everything in its place, allowing your mind to focus on the main task. In the context of 2026, when everyone has to tighten their belts, this is exactly the kind of smart tool. Cheap, not flashy, not junk, but saving you tens of minutes on every project. And if you ask people who have used it, they'll all say the same very American thing. It's not fancy, but I don't work without it anymore. Almost anyone who does DIY or woodworking has done the same thing. Cut zip ties with regular pliers, then wondered why the cut edges are razor sharp, catch on sleeves, cut skin, or why the finished product looks very amateurish. It's not because you did poorly, and that's because you're using the wrong tool for a very small but repetitive task. Flush cutters or close cutting pliers are something many people think of as electronics or toys. Until they try it, with just one cut, the zip tie is perfectly flat, without burrs or sharp edges. It looks neat, doesn't hurt to touch, and most importantly, I no longer have that uncomfortable feeling every time I reach into a tight space. At Harbor Freight, this item is only about $5 or $8, cheaper than a craft beer, but it fixed a bad habit that had existed for years, using large pliers for everything. In 2026, when everyone hates buying junk and hates having to redo things that should have been done neatly from the start, flush cutters are a very worthwhile tool. Small or specialized, and used more often than you think. It doesn't replace large pliers. It just appeared at the right time, did the right thing, and then disappeared from your grasp, just like a good tool should. And once you've started to care about neatness, accuracy, and comfort, the next item we'll talk about will make you realize sometimes speed and convenience are what you use most every day. If you were to ask what item in the garage is used more frequently than a drill, the answer is very simple: a utility knife, cutting cardboard boxes, ripping open cement bags, opening wooden crates, cutting floorboards, adjusting insulation, small tasks, but they happen constantly. And precisely because it's so familiar, many people just buy a cheap knife at random, open it with two hands, get the blade stuck, have to use a screwdriver to change the blade, and then tell themselves, Oh well, what does it matter? Until you're holding something in one hand, the other hand is busy holding materials, and you have to put everything down just to open the knife. The annoyance isn't great, but repeating it over and over is very annoying. A one-hand flip utility knife under $112 at Harbor Freight won't make you cut twice as fast. It only helps you cut 3 to 5 seconds faster each time. But when you add it up over hundreds of times a year, you'll understand why this is a product many American dads jokingly say, "I use this more than my phone." In 2026, smart buying won't be about buying expensive things, but about buying things that reduce friction in daily routines. This knife isn't flashy, it's not for show, but it opens with one hand, changes blades without tools, and is always ready when you need it. And once you start paying attention to tools that help you work neatly, accurately, and without having to redo things, the next item will take you to another level, measuring correctly instead of guessing quickly. If you've ever stood in front of a bolt or drill bit shelf and thought, this size should be about right, it looks close enough, chances are you've bought the wrong size, brought it home and it didn't fit, then had to drive back to the store or, worse, left it and bought it again. It's not because you lack experience, that's because guessing always loses to accuracy. A digital caliper under $15 at Harbor Freight won't turn you into a professional mechanic. It does just one very simple but extremely important thing. It gives you the real numbers. What's the bolt diameter? What size drill bit do I need? How thick is the wooden board or metal sheet? Everything is clearly visible on the screen. No squinting, no guesswork required. Buying the wrong thing isn't just about losing a few dollars. It's also a waste of time, effort waiting for the goods, and it completely disrupts your work momentum. A cheap but accurate caliper can help you avoid that series of hassles. You bought it right from the start, did it right away, and don't have to blame yourself for not measuring more carefully. Many people think calipers are too technical for DIY, but in reality, once you get used to measuring before buying, you'll find yourself much less frustrated. And that's the kind of smart tool for times of austerity. Not flashy, not wasteful, but you can see your money isn't being wasted. Once you have the numbers in hand, the next step is very natural. How do you cut it neatly and cleanly without needing bulky machinery? That's when we talk about the next dish. In America, many people grow up with the mindset that if there's a machine, use the machine. Using your hands and feet is the last resort. And yes, in many cases, machines win. But if you've ever fired up a saw just to cut a small piece of wood or adjust a piece of trim that was almost finished, you'll understand the feeling. Noisy, dusty, and a bit overkill for the job at hand. A pull saw is a very American kind of counterintuitive tool. It cuts by pulling, not pushing. It sounds strange, but that's precisely what helps make the cuts neat, smooth, with less tearing of the wood, and much easier to control, even if you're not a professional carpenter. At a price point of around $10–15 at Harbor Freight, this is the kind of tool many people buy on a whim, only to realize later, wow, why do I use this so much? It's particularly useful for finishing tasks, cutting the ends of wooden dowels, adjusting mortises, cutting PVC pipes, or handling areas where bringing out a machine would only complicate things. The reality is that the smart buying isn't always the fastest or most aggressive buying. Sometimes it's about buying things that are slow enough so you don't have to do them again. A pull saw doesn't replace a chainsaw, but it helps you avoid small mistakes, and it's those small mistakes that end up costing you money. And when it's cut and the edges are still a little sharp or uneven, the next item appears very naturally, a tool to adjust it just right instead of cutting it from scratch. If you've ever done woodworking or DIY for long enough, you'll recognize a very familiar moment. The wood piece is almost the right size. The drill hole is a little tight, the cut edge is a little sharp, and you're standing there wondering, should I cut it again from the beginning or try to force it to fit? Both options cost money in different ways. A set of hand files under $10, $12 at Harbor Freight isn't something you get excited about buying. No one shows off their manicured nails. But when things are just a little off, a file is the safest, slowest, and least destructive tool. You adjust slowly, controlling every millimeter, and often save the detail instead of having to discard it and to start over. In America, there's a very shop-like saying, measure twice, cut once, and file when you mess up. It sounds like a joke, but it's very true, especially in a context where materials are not cheap. Discarding a piece of wood just because it's slightly too tight is a wasteful practice that's hard to swallow. Hand filing won't make you faster, but it will prevent you from having to go back to the starting point. And that's smart buying, spending a few dollars to avoid losing tens or even hundreds of dollars. It doesn't replace machinery, it just stood there, silently correcting the small deviations that machines often make, which would only make things worse if used further. And once you've adjusted it to fit, the next question naturally arises. How can you tighten, loosen, operate faster without rummaging through the entire toolbox? That's when we move on to the group of tools related to force and leverage. Almost anyone who has ever repaired a car, a machine, or removed old bolts has experienced a very familiar moment. You put all your strength into the ratchet, grit your teeth, your hands are shaking, and the only thought in your head is, I hope this thing budges before this handle breaks. And sometimes the ratchet really does break. It's not because it's bad, but because you're making it do work it's not meant for. In America, garage people often say a very straightforward phrase, ratchet to turn, breaker bar to break. A breaker bar has no sophisticated mechanism, no delicate gears. It's just a long steel bar that provides great leverage to safely and controllably break loose a stubborn, rusty, or over-tightened bolts at a price of around $15 at Harbor Freight. A breaker bar is a one-time purchase that saves you from having to buy a $100 ratchet again. In 2026, when everyone hates disposable items and hates having to buy things that shouldn't have broken, this is a very wise expenditure. It's not used every day, but when you need it and don't have it, you'll miss it immediately. And when the last bolt finally budged, the next question naturally became, how do you pry, adjust, and realign it without scratching or damaging the surface? That's when the next dish appeared. If you've ever used a screwdriver for prying, then I sympathize. You're not alone. Many American homeowners and carpenters have done this, often in a hurry or thinking simply, I'll just pry it a little. Then the familiar thing happened. The screwdriver bent. The head chipped. The wood edges scratched, or worse. My hand slipped and left a very unsightly mark. It's not because you're being heavy-handed, but because you're using the wrong tool for the right job. A pry bar that costs about $3.99 at Harbor Freight solves that problem perfectly. It's not intelligent, not sophisticated, just a steel bar shaped in the right places to distribute force evenly, helping you pry, lift, adjust, or separate parts without damaging the surrounding surface. The right leverage is always safer than brute force. A pry bar is the kind of tool you buy once, use infrequently, but every time you use it, you think, yeah, I should have had this sooner. And once everything is pried open, straightened, and adjusted into the correct position, the next natural step will be, how can we tighten it faster and more neatly without having to switch back and forth between a whole bunch of tightening tools? That's when we talk about the next dish. If you've ever been under a car or bent over in a tight corner of a garage, you'll understand this feeling. Just finished tightening one bolt, only to discover the one next to it is a different size. So you push yourself up again, change the tightening lever, go back to the old position, and then wonder, why is such a small task so tiring? The dual drive ratchet was born for those exact moments. A wrench that works with both 1 4-inch and 3 8-inch sizes might sound like a marketing gimmick. But once you've used it, you'll find yourself reaching for it first without even thinking. It's not strong enough to break loose tough nuts. That's what the breaker bar is for. But for assembly work, minor repairs, and adjustments, it's much faster and more convenient. For around $1,208, you're buying a tool that replaces 2 inexpensive wrenches, saving both money and space. It's not something you brag about. It's just something that's always in your hand before you even think of anything else. And as tightening and loosening became faster, the next natural step was how to keep things from loosening again due to vibration. That's when the lock nut set comes into play. If you've ever fixed a lawnmower, a wheelbarrow, a wooden gate, or anything that vibrates or shakes, you'll be familiar with a very American scenario. It works fine when you're done. A few weeks later, you hear a rattling sound, and then a screw suddenly isn't there anymore. And so you take it apart again, tighten it, maybe even add thread locker, and tell yourself, this time it's probably okay. But the truth is, you're putting out fires, not preventing them. A nylon lock nut assortment for about $9.99 isn't something you'll feel is worth the money the moment you buy it. It just sat still in the drawer, very quietly. But it's that tiny nylon core that prevents vibration, liquid, and small malfunctions from escalating into big problems. Smart buying now isn't just about fixing things when they break, but about fixing them before they break. This lock nut set helps you do that for less than the cost of a fast food meal, but the effect lasts for years. You don't have to go back and tighten it. You don't have to look for the screws that fell in the grass, and you don't have to be annoyed that you should have done it more carefully from the start. And once everything is properly secured, the next very practical question will be, how do you protect your own hands when chores are repeated day after day? That's when we talk about the next dish. A lot of people buy gloves with a rather contradictory mindset. On the one hand, I want to protect my hands, but on the other hand, I don't dare to use them forcefully because I think these gloves are expensive. I'll regret it if they get torn. And so the familiar thing happened, taking off the gloves quickly, only to end up with scratched, dirty hands, or worse, covered in chemicals. The reality is very simple. Gloves are consumables. It was born to get dirty, to tear, to sacrifice itself for your hands. And so, buying gloves that are too expensive for everyday repairs is a kind of making things difficult for yourself. Those work gloves, for about $9.99 at Harbor Freight, hit that sweet spot. They're thin enough to grip screws, sturdy enough to protect your hands from sharp edges, and most importantly, you can use them without worrying about wearing them out. You don't have to think about it every time you do dirty or heavy work. Just bring it in and do it. Good gloves are gloves that are used frequently, not just kept in a drawer for show. And once your hands are protected, the next natural step will be, how do you pick up the shells that fell under the car without having to kneel on the concrete floor? That's when the next dish spoke up. There's a moment that almost every American homeowner is familiar with. A snail falls to the floor, rolls under a cabinet or car, and you stand there for a few seconds wondering, do I really need to bend down and pick it up? When I was young, it didn't matter at all. But by 26, your back and knees will start reminding you that every bow comes at a price. And kneeling on the concrete floor just to pick up a few cent shell suddenly became an unappealing decision. A telescoping magnetic pickup tool from Harbor Freight, which costs about $5, solves that problem perfectly. It stretched out, reaching into places where hands couldn't reach, neatly sucking up the snail without crawling, swearing, or needing to rest afterward. No high tech, just a magnet stick doing its job. Remember that buying smart isn't just about saving money, it's also about conserving energy for more important things. This tool doesn't make the project look better, but it helps you avoid getting tired from trivial matters. And when the light in the garage starts to become important for seeing those small things clearly, you'll quickly realize there's something else that helps you keep both hands free while you work. If you've ever held a flashlight with your chin while tightening a screw with one hand, all the while telling yourself just a little bit longer, then you understand why headlamps are one of the most underrated tools until someone tries them. A $19.99 rechargeable headlamp from Harbor Freight won't light up your garage like a Hollywood movie, but it does something very important. It illuminates exactly where you're looking, while both your hands are free to work. No need to adjust the lamp, no need to turn the lamp, no need to mumble because the shadow falls exactly where it needs to be seen. For familiar tasks like fixing cars, wiring, crawling under vehicles, climbing into attics, or doing carpentry in dark corners, a headlamp is the kind of tool that many people say is truly, I don't use it every day, but when I do, it makes a world of difference. Headlamps help you work longer without straining your neck, tiring your shoulders, or having to stop just because the light isn't cooperating. And once you're more comfortable, the next very practical question will be, how do you stand for long periods without getting tired, especially when you're no longer in your 20s? That's when the next course comes into play. There's something very annoying that almost no one likes to admit. You don't get worse at your job with age, but your body does. Standing to fix things at the table, standing to saw wood, standing to weld, standing around in the garage for another few dozen minutes. It was fine when I was young, but at some point, your back starts to tighten, your knees ache, and the next morning you wonder, I didn't even work for that long yesterday, did I? A set of anti-fatigue mats costs about $10 for $4 at Harbor Freight and won't cure old age, but it significantly reduces the cost after each work session. The soft cushion absorbs force, reducing pressure on your knees and spine, helping you stand longer without constantly shifting your weight or looking for a seat. This isn't a flashy item. No one brags about a mat in their garage. But many users have this same thought, I wish I had bought this sooner. And once you're more comfortable standing while working, the final question will naturally be, how do you handle those small, delicate snails without cracking, damaging, or swearing? That's when the final dish appeared. There's a very specific kind of frustration in the garage that everyone has experienced. The screw is tiny, the screwdriver is a bit too big, and after just a slight slip, the screw head is rounded off like a coin. It didn't break, explode, or fail immediately, but it was enough to ruin the entire workday. At that moment, you had two choices: keep trying and cursing, or give up and tell yourself to figure it out tomorrow. Both are unnecessary costs for something that should be very simple. A precision screwdriver set costing around $6-10 at Harbor Freight solves exactly this kind of problem. It's not because it's high-end, but because it's the right size. When the screw head fits perfectly, you don't need to use force, you won't strip the threads, you won't crack the plastic, and you won't have to start over just because of a small detail. This screwdriver set might not be used every day, but the day you need it and don't have it, you'll remember it immediately. And that's how this list ends. 15 items under $20, not for showing off or displaying, but to work for you, more gently, more neatly, and with less frustration. Everything you just saw wasn't meant to show off my gear, but to reiterate a very simple point. A good tool isn't the most expensive one, but the one you actually use. All 15 of these items are under $0, none are perfect, and none are meant for bragging. But if you're a homeowner or carpenter, They solve those repetitive little tasks that annoy you the most every weekend. Now it's your turn. Which dish from this list are you having? Are there any tools under $20 that you've used for years and still find worth the money? Please leave a comment below, as real experiences from real users are always more valuable than advertisements. If this video helps you avoid buying junk and to spend your money more wisely, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos about what to buy, what to avoid, and why. This video is not sponsored, does not contain sales links, and all sharing is based on real experiences and personal perspectives. Prices and quality can change over time, so always check if the product meets your needs before purchasing. See you in the next video.